Peru's National Jury of Elections continues processing the request to annul votes cast in the presidential runoff of June 6. In the meantime, mobilizations in defense of the will of the Peruvian electorate are expected. In Uruguay, unions called a 24-hour general strike against hunger and inequality for work and wages. Zambia's former president and independentist leader Kenneth Kaunda has died at the age of 97. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. In Peru, the president of the National Jury of Elections, Jorge Luis Salas Arenas, announced that the plenary of the Electoral Authority will continue processing the request to annul votes cast in the presidential runoff of June 6 throughout the coming weekend, with the aim of speeding up the process. In the meantime, new mobilizations in defense of the will of the Peruvian electorate are expected. During the public hearing held this Thursday, Salas informed that the electoral body continues to work on the resolution of challenged electoral records after the special electoral juries of the country, the bodies of first instance in this process, issued their decisions. He pointed out that once this stage has been completed, the results of the presidential election will be officially announced and the winner presented. On the other hand, supporters of the candidate for the Free Peru Party, Pedro Castillo, called for a national demonstration this Saturday in defense of democracy and the will of the people. An interim president of Peru, Francisco Sagasti, urged citizens to respect the process conducted by the electoral authorities as they evaluate the request to annul votes filed by the far-right and losing presidential candidate, Keiko Fujimori.
Respect the rules and democratic forms, as well as the electoral bodies and authorities that deserve all our respect and have received the support and the very close supervision of the international electoral observers who have monitored and analyzed the work of our organizations, and consider that it has been clean, quiet and calm, even in a pandemic situation. Let's wait calmly for the final results. Let's democratically respect these according to the ethical electoral pact that all the candidates signed at the beginning of the process.
Likewise, Sagasti called on citizens to work together to strengthen the country's democratic institutions in order to overcome the long-standing political crisis.
On you to remain united. I know that there are very different points of view among our population, but after the electoral process, all citizens have the imperative, the obligation, the need to be united and work together, the state, civil society, the private sector, academic organizations, the community and grassroots organizations, so that together we can drive our country forward.
In Uruguay, unions called a 24-hour general strike against President Luis Lacalle's government to demand measures to fight poverty, hunger, unemployment and discrimination. Under the slogan "Against Hunger and Inequality, for Work and Wages," workers mobilized in a caravan of vehicles touring the capital Montevideo before rallying outside the presidential offices, where they hope to deliver their demands to the president. At the same time, several social movements are carrying out a campaign to collect signatures to repeal 135 articles of the Law of Urgent Consideration, approved by the government a year ago, a neoliberal legislation that promotes budget cuts in the public sector, supports the privatization of public companies, and restricts the right to strike of workers, among many other setbacks.
Secretariat of our PITCNT Trade Union Center called this press conference to reiterate, to communicate the decision adopted almost unanimously at the representative table on May 13th, more than a month ago, that tomorrow a 24-hour general strike will be held throughout the country, with the slogan that it is a strike against hunger, against inequality, for work and better wages, against forms of discrimination and anti-union persecution. This general strike is absolutely justified in view of the fact that the executive power refuses to go to a national dialogue in defense of life. Unfortunately, the executive branch rejected this offer for dialogue. And today, we have a situation where we have more than 100,000 new poor people and 80,000 new unemployed persons.
Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro and former Justice Minister Sergio Moro could be linked to the murder of councilwoman and social activist Marielle Franco in March 2018. Former Rio de Janeiro Governor Wilson Witzel on Wednesday accused the president and former top official of interfering in investigations into Franco's assassination. Witzel, who was impeached for corruption, testified before the Senate Parliamentary Investigation Committee and said that former Judge Sergio Moro threatened a key witness who linked President Bolsonaro's family to Ronnie Lessa and Elcio de Queiroz, the killers of Franco and her driver. The Brazilian Senate decides this Thursday whether to authorize the sale of the state-owned energy company Eletrobras, considered the largest in Latin America and responsible for 50% of energy transmission in a South American country. If the bills are approved, President Jair Bolsonaro will promote a capitalization process, meaning the government will sell company shares on the stock exchange. Several senators have criticized the lack of time to analyze the legislation. Meanwhile, experts and company workers who've taken strike action to reject the move denounce that the possible privatization of Eletrobras will increase electricity rates and lead to a poorer quality service. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Independent media outlet Brazil Wire published revelations that the UK government lobbied presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro on behalf of British companies in the run-up to the 2018 presidential election. To discuss these revelations and what they mean, we now welcome independent Brazilian journalist Natalia Urban, who's one of the authors of the article. Natalia, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Natalia, top epidemiologist Dr. Ethel Maciel has accused the Brazilian government of Jair Bolsonaro of trying to force scientists to approve an AstraZeneca-only vaccination plan. What can you tell us about why this might be?
Well, first of all, Maciel, who participated in the committee, said that the whole thing was very sketchy from the beginning, because Bolsonaro basically ignored the advice given by the rest of the committee and tried to approve a plan, saying that the scientists were behind the plan, which they weren't. And they have to go to the Supreme Court to try to make the plan not go around, because Bolsonaro basically only wanted to have AstraZeneca as the only vaccination used in Brazil, which makes me and my colleagues very suspicious, because a secret document that we obtained through Freedom of Information Act showed that the British government lobbied Bolsonaro when he was still a candidate in 2018 on behalf of many British companies. And among those companies, we had AstraZeneca on the list. A private letter addressed to Bolsonaro on 29 of June of 2018, the then ambassador of Brazil, Vijay Rangarajan, invited the presidential candidate to a residence to meet a number of what they call strategic partners in Brazil. Those partners included the president of AstraZeneca, as well other companies like BP, Shell, etc. And so far, we all know that Bolsonaro has a very denialist position on behalf of vaccines and sciences, but the AstraZeneca vaccine is the only one that Bolsonaro has never criticized, which makes us question why. Did they had a deal with the company when he was still a candidate? Does he has another type of relationship that we are not aware of it so far?
Natalia, that's very interesting, but how else might this relationship that you've revealed between the British companies, backed by the British government and the Bolsonaro administration, be playing out in other areas?
Yes, they have been playing out in mining companies and oil as well, since British mining giant Anglo America has over 300 researchers applications to explore 18 indigenous territories in the Amazon. We all know that indigenous and environmentalists are fighting against the Bolsonaro government to not allow the exploration of their land, but the British government with making a lobby on behalf of these companies are already anticipate a favorable decision on behalf of the exploration. And companies like Shell and BP, to whom the UK ambassador in Brazil made over 20 times since 2017, had already accumulated over 13.5 billion barrels of Brazilian oil, which is more than companies like Petrobras, the Brazil state company of oil, has accumulated. So it's really sketchy how the British companies have been gaining so much money since the coup that removed Dilma Rousseff of the power. And of course, and they are gaining so much more money now with Bolsonaro.
Natalia, last month, some 40 British supermarkets and food businesses, they threatened to stop sourcing products from Brazil over proposed land reform, citing the threat to the Amazon, which is an issue that's caught some global attention. And as you mentioned there is a link there to these British interests. How do British mining interests, for example, play into this? And we're seeing right now how Bolsonaro is pushing through these land reforms which indigenous peoples are protesting against, and also trying to lift any environmental laws that apply in the case of the Amazon and Brazil's natural resources.
Well, even though we are in the midst of a pandemic and the indigenous communities are being very badly affected, the Congress in Brazil has 2 bills of laws that are under discussion with the proposals to change the rules of land title regularization in Brazil, which would make the stealing of the indigenous lands more easier and basically legalize it on the eyes of law. However, both of those bills of law are being criticized by specialists, and instead of promoting advices from those specialists, the government is kind of stimulating new invasions and increase of deforestation rates in the Amazon. British mining company Anglo American made 3 copper mining research applications on the protected lands of indigenous people, the Mundukuru, who are currently under attack right now from mining companies and like illegal miners and mining companies who are acting already in the area but illegally. The fact that a community leader gave an interview to Greenpeace saying that Anglo America made the applications in the territory of the Mundukuru in 2019, already awaiting for Bolsonaro push for a favorable legislations that would make them legal to explore the indigenous lands without the authorization of the indigenous people. So far, the indigenous lands continue to be illegal. The exploration and mining of the indigenous lands continue to be illegal by Brazilian constitution, but Bolsonaro keeps pushing the Congress to specifically permit the act, which is something that indigenous people in Brazil definitely are not very, they are completely against it.
Natalia Urban, who's an independent Brazilian journalist, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your findings on this strategic special relationship between the British government and that of far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Zambia's former president, Kenneth Kaunda, the father of independence, has died at the age of 97. He was the last survivor of a generation of leaders in the struggle against European colonialism. He ruled Zambia for 27 years on a socialist one-party state platform, but as happened with other newly independent states, colonial powers kept their grip on the economy and culture. Widespread corruption and mismanagement ended Kaunda's political career in the country's first plural elections in 1991. A champion of nationalist African socialism, Kaunda also implemented policies imposed by the International Monetary Fund and was friendly to the United States. Under his rule, Kaunda actively helped the armed liberation struggle of neighbouring Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa. He was also active in the movement of non-aligned countries. Kaunda had been admitted to the Minor Soko Medical Centre, a military hospital in Lusaka, on Monday, where authorities disclosed that he was being treated for pneumonia.
He said Kaunda had stood up for Zambia at the critical moment, so we can all stand up.
And in West Africa, Guinea is set to announce this weekend an end to the Ebola epidemic. This is what the health minister said.
We're about to announce in the coming days the end of the Ebola virus infection circulation, more precisely on June 19th, 2021. And this important ceremony is planned in the region of Nzerekore, which will be attended by all the actors who have valiantly performed during this epidemic.
This Ebola outbreak was the same place as the West African outbreak that killed 1,100 people. Thanks to new innovations, as the minister said, Guinea was able to contain the virus in just 4 months, preventing the disease from spreading beyond the country's borders.
At least one person died and 7 others were missing after houses and bridges were washed away when a river burst during heavy monsoon rains in Nepal. According to official reports on Wednesday, a landslide caused by the monsoon deluge blocked a river, which then burst and sent a flood of water downstream late Tuesday, inundating a settlement near the capital, Kathmandu. Police and army personnel rescued at least 60 people using helicopters for the difficult-to-reach areas. The number of deadly floods and landslides has increased in recent years in Nepal. Experts say that climate change and more road construction could be triggering the deadly disasters.
The river started swelling. Then I heard that a landslide had blocked the river and it was now coming our way, so we all went higher up. The river kept getting big. The situation became frightening. None of the residents have slept tonight. We haven't slept at all looking at this terrifying situation. It all happened after 8 or 9 at night. This area was all flooded.
The elections in Iran are in the final stretch, with 5 reformers and so-called principalist candidates disputing the ballots. International mainstream media have been depicting a country immersed in apathy and discontent after years of economic and financial sanctions by the United States and its allies. The supreme leader of the country, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said a high turnout would show the world the strength of the Islamic Republic. With some 57% of support in the opinion polls, principalist candidate Ebrahim Raisi, the country's judiciary chief, looks poised to emerge as Iran's new president.
Speaking of our upcoming elections on Friday, it's been several months that American and British media and the mercenaries working under their flags and those media are killing themselves to maybe question the elections and weaken the participation of the people. They want to somehow make accusations against the elections in the Islamic Republic with all sorts of comments and remarks. If we want the pressure by the enemies, including economic pressures such as sanctions and so on, to be removed or erased, the participation of the people should increase and our public support is shown to the enemies.
A Palestinian teenage boy was shot and killed by Israeli troops during a protest in the occupied West Bank. The images correspond to the public funeral held in honor of 16-year-old Ahmed Salih Dawood, a victim of Israeli army fire during a protest south of the West Bank in the village of Betia, where a new illegal Israeli settlement is being established. The protesters opposed the colonization of Palestinian territory by the Zionist regime were met with gunfire from the occupying army. Meanwhile, Israel resumed military operations Wednesday with a new bombing over Gaza, just 3 days after Naftali Bennett was sworn in as Prime Minister. A general strike in Lebanon is demanding a rescue government to face the country's acute economic crisis. The strike was called by the Lebanese Labour Union and has been supported by the private sector, traders and banks. This is how Beirut was looking on Thursday. The strike emptied the streets of Lebanon's major urban centres. Strikers also installed roadblocks. The country is experiencing one of its worst economic crises ever, with shortages of fuel, electricity, medicine and growing inflation. The Lebanese pound has plummeted, sliding from 1,500 to the dollar to a street rate of around 15,000 in June this year. The currency collapsed when the international financial system withheld funds in punishment for authorities not implementing neoliberal reforms. Later, banks locked out dollar deposits. The blast at Beirut's port that killed some 700 people and wounded 4,000 in 2019 ignited social upheaval and brought down the government. Since then, there's been a provisional government in charge of affairs.
The country is dying. All sectors are dying. The health sector, the social sector, the economic sector, education and environment are all in the downturn. It is a people's right in normal days to have a government. How about exceptional days? We need a Salvation government.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus, you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Garson. Thank you for watching.